What's up everyone? In today's video, I'll be replacing a traditional salt-based water softener, and I'll be upgrading myself to a saltless system. In other words, it doesn't require salt. So here's the reason why I'm going this route. I've had the system here for about a little bit over 7 years. It's not really softening like it used to. When I contacted the seller about the issues that I've been experiencing, they let me know that the media in this tank should be replaced about every 5 years or so. It's going to cost about $500 to have somebody come out and do that for me. Now, I'm usually accustomed to doing things myself, and if I'm going to spend $500 on that, I did a little bit of research and also wanted to take a look at the costs that were associated with my system. So let's run the numbers real quick. The system here regenerates about 3 times a week. It's about how much water we use. Every time it regenerates, it uses at least 40 gallons of water. Now, I did some math, and water in my area costs 0.13 cents per gallon, which doesn't sound like a lot of money. Over the course of a year, it's about $60 to $65 worth of water to backflush the system like it normally runs. Again, it doesn't sound like a lot of money, but hang on. When it comes to the salt that I'm putting into the tank, I put about 80 pounds a month. That's 2 bags, and it costs $5 per bag. Rough and tough, it's about $180 worth of salt that I'm putting in the system, plus the $60 that I'm putting in for the water. Now, this system does run on electricity. We're not going to account for that because I'm sure it doesn't use a lot of power. But then when I factor in $500 to replace the media in the tank, it's a little bit much. On top of that, every time I lose power, I have to come in and reprogram this thing. It's a little bit frustrating. In addition, when it comes to the salt, 80 pounds of salt, not too much, but it's not something I can ask my wife to pick up at the grocery store. I got to go in and get it myself. And it's typically an afterthought, or I'm driving home and I realize I forgot the salt. Another thing is that I'm constantly stealing my wife's good knives to cut the bottom of the salt bag so I could dump salt into the system. And then they start to get rusty, which means I have to hide them in the garage. I've probably got a few of these in here, so don't tell her. Now, the benefits to going with a system that doesn't use salt is you don't have to buy salt, so you're saving that money already. It doesn't use any electricity, so I don't have to worry about coming out here and reprogramming it every time that the power goes out. It doesn't ever have to backwash, so there's no need to use any water whatsoever to flush the system. It's practically maintenance free. Now, there is an asterisk here. The pre-filter that lives in the housing up here does have to be replaced once a year, at a cost of about $55. That's for the whole year. After your system reaches 1 million gallons, which according to my monthly bill should be in about 10 years, you may need to replace the media, which is the charcoal, in the charcoal filter, at a cost of about $350. If you do the math on that, it's a lot cheaper to operate a system that doesn't use salt, and I don't have to add salt. I don't have to fight with the salt at the grocery store. I don't have to lug it in the back of my car and get salt all over the place. And I don't have to hold it up here and dump it into the brine tank and continue to damage and destroy my wife's steak knives. I went with a company called SpringWell, and here's why. You basically go to the website, browse what they've got, find a fit that works for your home, make a purchase, and it shows up on your doorstep. You can install it yourself. Nobody's here upselling you, trying to get you more information. There's not any pushy salespeople. The other thing that I like about them is that their customer service was on point. So before I get too far into it, let's talk about how the system works. So first, you've got your water that flows into the pre-filter, and this takes out your sediment and any kind of debris that's in your water. From there, the water runs into the charcoal filter, and this is where it eliminates chemicals, chlorine, anything that makes your water foul. All that is cleansed out from there. From there, the water will then run into your softener, or it's also called a conditioner. And basically, anything that made it through the first 2 stages is now neutralized, so that it doesn't become scale or buildup on your fixtures. Essentially makes your water soft. Take a quick moment to talk about the supplies that I used for this particular build. You're going to need 4 of these 1-inch corrugated water connectors. These are basically what you're using to connect the system to your home. Now, I recommend corrugated water connectors just because they kind of go on like a hose. Not necessarily, you don't have to use PVC or copper tubing for this. You're also going to need 3 1-inch long PVC nipples, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And I do suggest installing a PVC shutoff valve, and this will allow you to turn off the water to your home right before the softener as opposed to having to put it outside. Again, I highly suggest you do it. This part only costs $5. You will need an entire roll of plumber's tape. And also, as far as tools are concerned, I'm basically using a large pair of adjustable pliers and a large adjustable crescent wrench. So the first step that we have to take will need to be 2 days, about 48 hours prior to the actual install. And we have to flood each tank with water. This is so we soak the carbon media on the inside with water. Also, instead of pulling this out of the top of the box, it's gonna be a lot easier if we just cut it out. I'm gonna cut down the edge like this. When we get down here, we're just gonna cut along the edge. So now that they're unboxed, the next step is we're going to be installing these bypass valves onto the top of each tank. And the valve basically installs like this. These two guys here with these rubber rings will actually insert into here. And once you got them in, you just tighten these in place. And these will actually pull it all the way in place where it needs to be seated properly. Okay, there's one. We'll repeat with the other one. A PVC elbow will now be installed on the inlet. This is the one that's leading into the tank, and this is so that we can connect a water hose to it. Now I do want you to notice that even once I fully tighten it, you can still rotate this, and this is on purpose. We also need to correctly position these levers. These arrows are very important. This arrow is pointing into the tank on the inlet, and this arrow is pointing out of the tank on the outlet. So this means that when we run water through it, it'll actually flow through. Now, if they were turned, let's say this way, this is actually a bypass. So in other words, water will basically flow from one side and then right out the other, but will not go into the tank. So when we put the water hose on and we turn the water on, we want to make sure that these are pointing in this direction. Since we can't connect a water hose directly to our tank, we have this adapter. It's called the hose bib assembly, and its only purpose is for us to be able to connect a water hose to each of the tanks and flood them with water. So now that it's connected, we're going to go ahead and start the water hose. And we're going to let this run until we see water coming out of the other end of the tank. Now I do want to mention, when you're flooding it with water, you only want to turn the water hose on halfway. You don't want to put it on full blast. Here we go. Once you got that, we'll shut the water off. So now that it's full, we're going to switch the levers to bypass, and we can go ahead and disconnect our water hose. We're going to remove the hose bib assembly, and then we're going to repeat this with the smaller tank. We're going to go ahead, once it's done, we're going to go ahead and do the bypass and then remove our hose and hose bib. So now we're just going to let these marinate for 2 days. We'll come back and then we're ready to do the installation. So at this point, both of these tanks have been soaking for a couple of days. We did that earlier. I'm going to go ahead and install the other PVC fittings on here on the outlets. And what we're going to do now is we're actually going to flush the carbon filter by putting a hose in, rushing the water out until it turns clear. Then we're going to take the hose, we're going to put it on the opposite side and then flush it the other way until the water runs clear. At that point, the carbon filter is ready to be installed. We're also going to repeat with the softener. Now keep in mind, you don't necessarily have to do this with the softener side. It's something that I prefer to do, and I would recommend, might as well do it as well. Also remember, we're going to take these off of bypass, so we're going to turn the valves so that they're facing towards the tank and water will come out. Now that both tanks have been flushed, I'm going to go ahead and put them back on bypass again. And this is just so when I'm moving them through the garage, I'm not spilling water all over myself. Just remember to put them back onto not bypass when we're done. And before I put these tanks in, I'm going to go ahead and remove this protective film from them. And it would actually be a little bit more difficult to remove this once I have them in position. So I'm going to take it off now. Let's also be sure to represent. Put our sticker right on here. There we go. Look at that. So before we can install the pre-filter, we have to get it prepped. Here's the parts we're going to need. This is the bracket that we use to hang the pre-filter from the wall. It actually mounts like this. This is your pre-filter, actual filter that goes inside of it. And these are the parts that I actually picked up myself at the hardware store. This is going to be a shutoff valve that I'm going to be installing. This is to allow me to shut my water off ahead of the pre-filter, ahead of the whole system in the house, so that I can do stuff in the future without having to go out to the water main. This isn't necessary, but it's something that I highly recommend you do. You will need some 1-inch PVC nipples, is what they call them. It says nipples on a box. Now, if you're not installing a shutoff valve, you just need two, one for each side. If you are going to install a shutoff valve, you will go ahead and need another one. Now, for the sake of keeping it simple, let's start by putting in the pre-filter. The top of this will unscrew. Like this. Inside, you're going to have a slip of paper. Take that out. You're going to have a gasket, very important, and you're going to have a lubricant. This is also very important. So what we're going to do now is install the actual filter. Go ahead and pull it out. And we're going to put it inside the canister. Now there is a small nipple on the bottom that this is going to sit inside of. And you'll know it's properly seated because it kind of falls into it. Once you get that seated, now we're going to go ahead and put the O-ring that was provided around the top. Now, if you look along the top of your pre-filter, there's kind of a indentation here. The ring that was provided is going to seat into that. Just like this. So now we're going to take the lubricant that was provided, and we're going to cut it open. And we're going to apply it along the ring. The reason we're doing this is when we go to fully tighten this, if the ring was dry, we could actually damage it or snap it. I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to repeat on the other side. So the lid will be replaced now, and the filter kind of moves around here, but it's okay because inside the lid are these teeth that are going to help guide it in place. Then you can go ahead and screw the filter cap back on. We're going to fully tighten it as much as we can here, and then once we get it mounted, we're going to tighten it even more. And there's a tool that's provided, and I'll get into that when we get to that step. So on the top here is a label that calls out inlet and outlet. This is going to be important when we go to install it to make sure you're installing it the correct way. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and install the PVC nipples that I purchased onto either side. So before we install the nipples, you absolutely have to put plumber's tape on both ends. And you're going to go in the same direction as the thread so that when you go to place your connections, they don't remove the tape. Okay, now that they've both been prepped, we can go ahead and proceed. Most of what I'm doing today is just tightening by hand, but it's not a bad idea to take a pair of pliers and just kind of give it a little bit more. You don't have to go extreme because you don't want to damage any of these plastic parts. My original plan was to install this shutoff valve over here on the side of the tank. The problem I have is the space that I'm putting this into is so constricted that I'm actually going to put this further down the line where it's coming out of the wall. And I'll show you when I do that. However, if you got space, I would recommend putting it here because it's easier to get to. Before we can take out the old system or work on the plumbing, we have to turn off the water to the house. So with the basic steps out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and pull the system out now. Now, since this is an upgrade video, all of you will probably be pulling out a system as well. Now, since everybody's systems are a little bit different, I'm not going to get into a lot of specifics here. I'll keep it very high level. Just keep in mind, all we're simply doing is simply disconnecting hoses from the back here and then pulling the system out. Now, you don't necessarily need to, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put these to bypass. There shouldn't be any more pressure in this tank. I just don't want to take a chance and just have something flood out of here. So I'm going to turn those off, and now we're going to go ahead and remove both of these connections from the back of the tank. Now they are going to leak some water because there's water in them. So if you see some water coming out, don't panic. Not a big deal. So now all I got to do is pull this whole tank out. So I do want to take a minute to talk about these connections I have here. When I installed my system originally, I could have built something out of PVC, or some people use copper tubing. I prefer these connectors here. If you can screw on a water hose, you can screw one of these on. It keeps it a lot easier. Now, if you've got a pre-plumb but it hasn't been cut in yet, if it's made out of PVC, you can basically put in a PVC elbow with a 1-inch thread on it and then add these pipes. You can find other videos on YouTube on how to do this. Now, if it happens to be flex tubing, you can also try using a shark bite adapter with a 1-inch thread. You can do that as well. So the next step we have is to figure out where we're going to mount this thing. Now, I want to get this over here so that I can connect this hose to it. This is my inlet hose. This bracket, like I said, is going to mount up here, and this tank will hang from it. Once you identify where it's going to go ahead and mark it out. So the hardware bag that comes with it's got these pretty hardcore bolts here. I'm going to go ahead and use those because they are pretty significant. Now behind this wall here, it's all plywood. If that's not the case at your house, you've got to find the studs so you can mount at least 2 of these bolts into a stud. If not, I would also recommend placing a cross beam with a piece of wood and actually mounting it into that. So like I said before, because of the limited space, I'm going to go ahead and install the shutoff valve on the line here that's coming directly out of the wall as opposed to next to my filter like I wanted to. And that's just so I can save room. Now I am going to go ahead and apply some plumber's tape here. And remember, if you apply it, you want to go in the same direction as the thread. All right. And then I can go ahead and install the other nipple on the other side here. And I'll tighten it up. So now that we've confirmed that we're golden here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to mark out the holes now so that we can drill those in. So when it comes to drilling the holes, I'm using a 3/16 inch bit, which is smaller than the screws that were provided. And then you're basically drilling in and making a pilot hole for the bolts we're going to be installing. So at this point, we're ready to mount this bracket. And what we've got here is 4 of these provided bolts with washers. And what I did is I aligned them with the holes that I already drilled. Now, since I don't have the bit for my drill, I can't find it, we're just going to go ahead and use a socket and ratchet to install this. All right, that's installed. Now the filter is going to be connected here as well. There's actually a red button on top here. No idea what it does, but there's a cutout that it's going to fit into up here. And it's going to be attached with 4 of the hex head screws with one hand and screw with one hand. Okay, now I can go ahead and connect the water that's coming into the house onto this side over here. And again, since this is plastic, we don't have to go RoboCop tight. We just go a little bit tight. At this point, we're going to go ahead and install the next hose, and this is going onto the outlet side. Before I jam these into that tight space back there, I'm going to go ahead and apply the plumber's tape now so that I'm not reaching around behind them after the fact trying to do this step. And I'm going to repeat with both tanks. So the tanks are officially in position now. Again, we've got water comes in, goes into the pre-filter, comes out of here, goes into the charcoal filter, runs out into the softener, and then runs back into the water supply. I haven't connected these yet, but now we can go ahead and connect the hoses. We're going to start by connecting the hose from the pre-filter into the inlet on the carbon filter. Now we're going to connect to the outlet on the charcoal filter. That hose will now connect to the inlet on your softener. And then finally, the outlet hose from your softener will run to the pipe that runs back into your house. So the last thing to do before we turn on the system is to turn off the bypasses. We want the water to flow through the softener and the charcoal filter, like so. So the last thing we're going to do before we turn it on is we're going to fully tighten the filter. With this wrench here, it's going to slip on the bottom. You're going to lift it upwards. You're going to lift it in place, and then you're just going to turn it. You want to make sure it's fully tightened. And if that's the case, you're good. Filter actually goes into the holder on top, like this. You always know where it's at. So now that I've got it all installed and plumbed, the final test is to put the water back onto the house and make sure nothing explodes. Now I'm going to keep the bypass or the shutoff valve turned off. And I just want to verify that that's not leaking. Once I get the water to the house turned on, I'm going to come in here and we'll have the fun together of turning on the water from this valve. So I put the water on to the water main. Now I'm going to flip the switch here and we're going to let the water channel through. It's going to take a moment to fill the pre-filter. I'm going to look for leaking from any of these plumbing and around the fitting here. It shouldn't leak. Then it's going to fill the charcoal filter. Then it's going to fill the softener, and then it's going to run into the house. Now I have turned on the water to my bathtub full blast on cold and also to the sink. And the plan is that I'm going to let the water cycle through this, and you're supposed to let it run for about 5 minutes to make sure this fully charges before you can turn off the water inside. So far, so good. So at this point, I've had it running for about 10 minutes. Water's coming out great on the inside of the house. There's absolutely no leaks happening on the system here. So we're ready to go.